If you ran your life like a company, would you keep yourself employed? It's a strange question, but it's one I found myself asking recently after spending years helping teams and departments operate more efficiently inside businesses. In companies, when something feels chaotic or overwhelming, we don't tell people to try harder. We don't tell them to wake up earlier or build a better morning routine. We redesign the system, we build frameworks. But when it comes to personal productivity, the advice suddenly changes. We tell individuals to be more disciplined, build stronger habits, wake up at 5, stick to the routine, and push harder. And the more I've thought about that contrast over the years, the more it has bothered me. Because if systems and frameworks are powerful enough to transform businesses, why are we relying almost entirely on willpower to run our lives? Hi, I'm Callie, and for most of my career, I've worked in operational roles helping companies redesign how work flows through teams and departments so that things function more smoothly and sustainably. And somewhere along the way, I realized something slightly uncomfortable. The frameworks that improve organizations almost never get applied to individuals. So today, I want to walk you through a framework that completely changed how I think about productivity in business. And it all started with one of the most popular productivity tools out there, the Eisenhower Matrix. It's simple and elegant with 4 quadrants labeled urgent, not urgent, important, and not important. And you sort your tasks accordingly into do, decide, delegate, or delete. When I first learned it, I genuinely loved it. It felt strategic and intentional. I applied it to my own workflow, and to be fair, it did improve things just a bit. I deleted a few unnecessary meetings, I stopped treating every email as urgent, and I delegated a handful of tasks that didn't require my involvement. But even as it improved my day, something felt incomplete. The matrix still revolved around me since it was focused on my time, my effort, and my prioritization. Even delegation wasn't truly solving the underlying issue because it was simply shifting the work temporarily. And that's when I started to realize that the framework assumed something I hadn't questioned before. It assumed that the workload itself was appropriate and that the only problem was how I was sorting it. That realization really hit me one morning while I was out on a run. I remember thinking that the Eisenhower Matrix felt like personal productivity wrapped in business language. It optimized my day, but it didn't fundamentally change the system. And at that point in my career, I wanted the business to function better, not just for my calendar to look cleaner. I had a team, I had departments, I had tools. Improving my own efficiency by 10% wasn't going to meaningfully move the needle for the rest of the company. It turns out the Eisenhower Matrix wasn't providing leverage. It was just incremental personal improvement. So instead of looking at tasks, I zoomed out and looked at structure. I pulled up our organizational chart and started thinking about departments rather than individuals. Every business has them, and they include things like operations, finance, sales, marketing, legal, and product lines. And this made me wonder whether the real opportunity wasn't in sorting tasks, but in redesigning how work flowed through those departments. I wanted to figure this out, but I also knew that if I started with my own team, this could quickly turn into another exercise in personal optimization. So instead, I chose to work on the marketing department. I chose marketing partly because they were overloaded and partly because their work was visible and measurable. I sat down and listed everything they were responsible for and ended up with a long list including campaign planning, content production, analytics, reporting, and so much more. Then I tried to apply the Eisenhower logic at the department level. We could delete a few meetings, we could eliminate a redundant tool or two. But delegation was largely circular since tasks would just end up moving from one person to another, but rarely disappear. And do simply translated to work harder, which wasn't a real solution. That was the moment the limitation of the Eisenhower framework became obvious, because the tasks weren't the problem, the structure was. The team was talented and capable, but they were spending enormous amounts of energy on repetitive, manual, or low-leverage work. The burnout I was seeing wasn't because they lacked discipline, but because the system required too much human effort for work that didn't actually need to be human-driven. And that's when I had my epiphany moment. It wasn't about doing, delegating, or deleting. It was about outsourcing, automating, and optimizing. I wrote those 3 words at the top of a blank page and began moving every task into one of those buckets. Outsource anything that doesn't require internal strategic ownership. Automate anything repetitive, rule-based, or predictable. Optimize what genuinely required human judgment but could be streamlined. I consciously didn't worry about budgets at first because I needed to see the full picture before letting the idea fail. Once I finished with my exercise, I had a solid picture of what could reasonably be outsourced, where we could apply automation, and what processes were so dated that some optimization could go a long way in streamlining functions. When I brought the draft to the head of marketing, I didn't try to explain my thoughts or even describe what I was trying to do. Because of this, I expected pushback, but instead he immediately understood where I was headed and truly saw the potential. What followed were serious conversations about cost, return on investment, and feasibility, because operational changes require financial justification. But the projected gains were real. We ended up showing reduced turnover risk, faster campaign cycles, fewer late-night emergencies, and clearer ownership. The plan was passed for budget approval unanimously, and we moved forward by implementing it in phases. Outsource first, automate second, optimize third. Within 6 months, the difference was tangible. The team wasn't just more productive, they were calmer. The reactivity decreased because there was time for proactive measures. The sense of constant firefighting diminished because the plan was clear and the workload balanced. But perhaps most importantly, we realized the process wasn't a one-time fix. As soon as we finished the exercise, there were new places we could outsource, new processes that could be automated, and additional ideas for optimization. Once I had the team thinking in terms of structural efficiency rather than personal output, they were able to see new opportunities everywhere. They started telling the rest of the company what was going on, and everyone wanted in. Over the next couple of years, I repeated this exercise across multiple departments, refining and reapplying the same principles. But more recently, an uncomfortable question surfaced. If I would never ask a team to simply try harder without redesigning the system around them, why was I asking that of myself? After running this framework across departments and watching it materially improve not just output but morale, I should have realized earlier why productivity in my own life felt off. If something this straightforward and structurally sound could change the trajectory of a business, why am I still relying on willpower when it comes to myself? Why is my personal life being managed like a to-do list instead of an operating model? Most of the advice I have consumed around personal productivity sounds ridiculous. Wake up at 5, build a better morning routine, clean daily instead of weekly, drink more water, stick to the habit, track everything, optimize your schedule. And none of it is inherently wrong, but every piece of it requires more effort, more discipline, more vigilance, more manual input. It seems like the only lever available to me is try harder. That's not productivity. That's pressure. And pressure, when sustained, doesn't create peace. It creates quiet stress that you normalize until you don't even recognize it anymore. The real epiphany came when I was recently watching my weekend quickly get pulled out from under me as I worked my way through an endless list of cleaning, yard work, errands, and paying bills. With only a couple hours left in the weekend, I asked myself a very simple question. If I were running my life like a company, would I be impressed with how it was structured? The honest answer was no. In fact, I probably wouldn't keep myself employed much longer. I'm competent, functioning, and consistently showing up and doing all the responsible adult things. But structurally, there are inefficiencies everywhere. Repetitive tasks that drain me weekly, administrative friction that could be eliminated, decisions that reappear every single day because I haven't designed defaults. All of this is work that technically has to be done, but doesn't necessarily have to be done by me in the way I'm doing it. In business, when something feels heavy or chaotic, we don't ask the team to wake up earlier. We zoom out and map the system. So I've decided to do the same thing. I'm going to stop thinking about my life as one overwhelming blur of responsibilities and start thinking about it in divisions, departments, and frameworks. Not because I want to make it corporate, but because I need clarity. So I'm turning myself into a company. Welcome to Callie James Incorporated. I spent the last couple days building the organizational structure of Callie James Incorporated, and instead of vague categories like life stuff, I defined real business units. The first is infrastructure, and it includes the resources that keep the machine running. The second is health, which isn't just fitness, but everything that keeps me going. And the last one is relationships, which includes all the people in my life. When I actually broke it down that way, something surprising happened. Tasks that felt random or overwhelming suddenly had context. Grocery shopping wasn't just an errand, it was a nutrition logistics function. Cleaning the house wasn't just something I should do, it was part of infrastructure maintenance. Scheduling appointments wasn't just annoying, it was a recurring administrative subtask that appeared in multiple departments. That's when the real aha moment landed. I truly didn't have a motivation problem, but a structural one. The relief I felt with this realization was physical, like a literal weight off my shoulders. Because once I started listing everything inside each division, I could see exactly where my time and energy were leaking. Weekends that I imagined as relaxing were actually being consumed by repetitive errands and maintenance tasks. Decisions I thought were minor were being made over and over again because I hadn't automated them or created a default. And perhaps most importantly, there were entire categories of things I claimed were important to me that weren't happening at all, simply because there was no space designed for them. The contrast with business became almost uncomfortable. I would never allow a department to operate without clarity on its responsibilities. I would never tell a team, just try harder to be healthy, without redesigning their workload. Yet that's exactly what I was doing to myself. So, I have decided to apply the same operational sequence to my life that I've done so many times for businesses and departments. First, I had to define the business units clearly. I already did this part, and you can see all the departments and sub-departments of Callie James Inc. here. The second step was to inventory the activities within each unit, both the ones I'm already doing and the ones I say matter but never make time for. And yes, I know there's absolutely things I'm still missing, because there's only so many small life tasks you can think of in a day. The third step is identifying what can be outsourced. Not everything can be, but quite a bit can. Sometimes it's the entire task, like yard work. Sometimes it's just a subtask, like scheduling or coordination. This is where I'm at now. The fourth step will be automating what's repetitive. Bills, subscriptions, reminders, recurring grocery orders, calendar blocks, anything rule-based that shouldn't require daily human decision-making. Then, I can move on to the fifth step, which is to optimize what remains. These are the things that genuinely require my presence, judgment, or emotional investment, and deserve to be streamlined so they're not weighed down by friction. And here's the part that has already changed how I feel. This isn't about cramming more into my life. It's about reducing unnecessary effort and decision overload so that the effort I do expend is intentional. When you approach personal productivity through willpower, you measure success by how much you push yourself. When you approach it through systems, you measure success by how little unnecessary strain exists. And that is a completely different equation. So starting now, I am not just someone trying to be more productive. I am the COO of Callie James Incorporated, and my job is not to extract more output from myself, but to design a life that functions smoothly enough to create space for what actually matters. So now it's time to actually execute, because frameworks are only powerful if you use them. Since Callie James Inc. is not a Fortune 500 company, at least not yet, I've intentionally kept the structure simple. 3 primary business units: infrastructure, health, and relationships. Or if we want to make it feel a little more human, resources, body, and people. Infrastructure is everything that keeps the machine running, like revenue from my job, money management, investments, bills, home operations, technology, and administrative overhead. All the invisible logistics that make adult life function, but rarely get acknowledged. Health is not just workouts. It's medical maintenance, preventative care, nutrition logistics, fitness programming, mental health, education, hobbies, and yes, even beauty and presentation. It's everything that contributes to whether I feel strong, clear, and capable. Relationships include my husband, my family, my friends, volunteering, my professional network, the people side of the equation. Because connection doesn't just happen, it requires maintenance and intentionality, just like everything else. If you're doing this alongside me, your structure might look different. You might need a dedicated kids division, or you might split infrastructure into finance and home operations, or you might need a caregiving unit. The point isn't to copy mine, the point is to create visibility. And I do recommend resisting the urge to create 15 hyper-specific departments, because once you zoom out, you start seeing patterns across categories. Overcomplicating the structure can actually hide the inefficiencies you're trying to uncover. When I ran this exercise in business, it was easy to identify what belonged to each department, because work tends to be repetitive and visible. Even more, the consistent reporting in business shows you when things are falling short in a department. But I just don't have that level of visibility in my own life, because no one is auditing how I'm spending my time, where I'm succeeding, and where I'm failing. So in applying this method to my personal life, I had to accept there are entire categories of things I say are important that simply aren't happening consistently, not because I don't care, but because my energy is already depleted by maintenance tasks. This is why I made sure I'm not only listing the things I currently do, but also the things I want to do more of. Basically what I'm already responsible for and what I want that department to look like at its best. In infrastructure, that means not just paying bills, but having a clean financial dashboard and automated savings systems. In health, not just occasionally exercising, but having structured programming and simplified nutrition. In relationships, not just responding to texts, but proactively planning connections. This distinction alone has been powerful because it separates reactive maintenance from intentional growth. So here we are. I have listed every recurring task, every errand, every administrative nuisance, every invisible responsibility I could think of. And now that it's all visible, I can finally see where my time is actually going. Weekends that I should be spending with friends and family have been consumed by errands, cleaning, scheduling appointments, and repetitive small decisions. None of this is dramatic, but all of it's cumulative. But now this is when the framework becomes real, because once the list exists, I can now move through it systematically, just as I've done all those times before. I'm going to start by outsourcing. Anything that does not require my judgment, creativity, or physical presence becomes a candidate. Once I'm done with outsourcing, I'll look at automations and then move on to optimizing what remains, since those are the things that should truly require me, and those tasks deserve thoughtful design. If I'm going to cook, how do I simplify the decision process? If I'm going to work out, how do I eliminate the friction of planning? If I'm going to maintain relationships, how do I create recurring touch points instead of relying on memory? Before we get too deep, one thing to keep in mind is that many tasks that feel non-outsourceable actually contain subtasks that are. Scheduling is a perfect example since I can't outsource physically attending a medical appointment, but I can outsource scheduling it. I can't outsource maintaining friendships, but I can automate reminders and recurring plans. Granularity is where leverage hides, and that's also why keeping the departments broad helps, since it allows patterns to become easier to spot. Hopefully, it's clear that this isn't about doing everything at once. In business, we would never overhaul an entire company in a single week. Instead, we phase it, we test it, we measure it, we adjust. So that's exactly what I'm doing. Starting now with March, I'm going to make this outsource month. I'm focusing on one lever at a time. What can I remove from my plate first? What tasks can I eliminate from my mental load entirely? Because removing effort creates immediate breathing room. And yes, this will involve money. I want to address this directly rather than pretending it doesn't matter. Outsourcing often requires financial investment, and I understand that not everyone has equal flexibility in this area. I'll be transparent about what I spend, what the trade-offs are, and what the return looks like. But I also believe that my time and energy are my biggest assets, and like any asset, they should be allocated strategically. Not every solution will be expensive, but I'm not naive in thinking I can make a substantial difference in my time allocation without some financial allocation. The goal is not extravagance, it's efficiency. And speaking of time as an asset, as time opens up through this process, as it should if I do this correctly, I don't want to accidentally fill it with more noise. Just like lifestyle tends to expand to meet income growth without a solid budget, if we don't have a plan for it, useless activities are likely to expand to fill unallocated time. So, alongside outsourcing, I am intentionally defining what I want that reclaimed time to fund. Maybe it's more golf or more reading. Maybe it's more intentional outings and less background stress. This is the beginning of a real operational experiment. I've used this framework to make teams calmer and companies more efficient. Now I'm applying it to myself. Not to become hyper-productive, not to wake up at 4:30 a.m., not to squeeze every ounce of output from my day, but to reduce unnecessary effort so that my energy goes toward things that actually matter. If you've been feeling like you're constantly trying harder, but never actually feeling lighter, I hope that you'll try this with me. Start by mapping your divisions, inventorying your tasks, and looking for the structural leaks instead of blaming your discipline. Next week, I'll be back with a real update on the first phase of this experiment, Outsource Month inside Callie James Incorporated, and what actually happens when I start removing effort from my life instead of trying to power through it. If you want to follow along as this unfolds in real time, you can subscribe here on YouTube and also follow me on Instagram and TikTok, where I'm sharing shorter updates on the plan as they happen. And until next time, remember, productivity shouldn't feel like pressure. If it does, the system probably needs redesigning.